Okay, so let's make sure this is working. I guess it isn't working. Maybe. Let's see if, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. Is anyone familiar with this guy? Heaton. He's a good guy. I want to tell you a story about a time that he was really rude to me. You guys want to hear that? No, he's a good friend, so I can say that. So I was in Las Vegas maybe about 3 years ago, and Heaton and I were walking down the street, walking back from dinner, and just talking, catching up about SaaS companies, products, all of that. And then he stops and goes, "You know, Nathan, you should shut down ConvertKit." And I don't know if anyone has ever told you that you should shut down something that you've worked on for years, but it's not a nice thing to say to someone. Like, hey, that thing that you love and that you've poured, at this point, a year and a half into building, you should shut it down. And instead of waiting for a reaction, he actually just kept walking. And I was like, what? And then I thought about it, I was like, okay, catch up to him. And he goes, or you could take it seriously and you give it the time, money, and attention it deserves and build it into something real. And so that was kind of a turning point in the history of ConvertKit. So I guess I should give you a little bit of that story. So I started ConvertKit in 2013 out of something that I called the Web App Challenge. And so I was a blogger designing software, teaching people how to do user experience, user interface design. And I wanted to start a SaaS company. And so I decided I was going to build a SaaS company entirely in public. And so what I did with that was put up a blog post and said, hey, my goal is to get to $5,000 a month in 6 months, and I'm going to blog about every step of the process. The product that I created through this is called ConvertKit. This was the very first marketing page for it. It was an email marketing tool that competed with MailChimp and others, but built for people who wanted to do better content upgrades on their site for a lot of content marketers. Our first year and a half kind of looked like this. Didn't get to that 6 months or that $5,000 a month in revenue. Instead, it kind of peaked out a little over $2,000. And then as I worked on it as a side project, it kind of gradually declined. So I hope that none of you have MRR graphs that look like this. And actually at this point, you're probably like, why is he giving a talk? This is not something that you should emulate. So about the time that Heaton told me that I should shut it down was as we're declining like that, the revenue's flat, and because really I was working on it as a side project. So really, as Heaton gave me this advice, I was faced with a decision, shut down this product or double down on it. And so I came up with a simple framework to help me make this decision. Because who here has been faced with a product that isn't an immediate success, right? Where a year in, you're trying to decide, should I go all in on this or not? Has anyone had that decision of should we shoot this in the head or grow it into something? A few people have. So I decided to ask come up with a simple framework and ask 2 questions. So the first one was, do you still want this as much today as you did the day that you started? So at this point, I'm a year and a half in, and I had another business, I had a successful blog, and so I didn't have to have ConvertKit work as a company. And so I was like, okay, do I still want to run a SaaS company as much today as then? And the answer was yes, absolutely, I still want this. So then it's kind of okay, go to question number 2, and that's, have you given this product every possible chance to succeed? And when I thought about it, I was like, okay, well, no, I've worked on this part-time. I haven't given it very much capital. And even though it's been a year and a half, it hasn't been my best effort. And so I thought, okay, there's really a disconnect between these 2 things of, I really, I say I want this, but then at the same time over here, the actions and the effort don't really match. And so then what I decided to do was okay, if I don't put all of my effort into this, I'm always going to wonder, years later, could I have made ConvertKit work as a company? So I decided to double down. So I put all of my savings into it, everything that I had from the blogging world of creating ebooks and that kind of thing. So I invested $50,000, hired an actual team. I just worked with contract developers before, And so I actually hired people full-time just focused on building ConvertKit. And the next thing that I did was focused on a specific niche. So before it was like email marketing for people who, are having trouble capturing leads, and I don't even know. The marketing was really painful. And we changed that to be email marketing for professional bloggers. And that all of a sudden people were like, oh, okay, I know a blogger. Would you like me to introduce them to you? I was like, yes, please. And so then we were able to start getting a little bit of traction. And then the last and probably most important thing was that we started doing direct sales. And so the problem that you run into with selling through content, which would be the opposite of direct sales, would be that you're getting rejected all the time and you don't know why. So let's say, for example, that I'm trying to get John here to buy my product. Hi, John. And I'm like, hey, would you buy ConvertKit? If we have that conversation in person, he has to give some kind of answer. He has to talk about it. Because if you imagine this interaction where you're sitting across from someone and you're saying, okay, will you buy this thing? And like, imagine if they just looked at you and they just looked at you right in the eyes and they're like, and they just turned and walked away. Like, you can't do that. If you're having a conversation, they have to engage. But online, when you're selling through content, then they have to respond in person versus online. If you're saying, hey, here's this blog post, here's this sales page, go sign up, someone will do the equivalent of that, walk away, because they'll just hit the back button. And so they're rejecting you without ever giving any feedback. And so by having these direct sales conversations, I would say, hey, will you buy ConvertKit? And would have to say, no, because, and come up with some good reason. We'd have a discussion. I could overcome those objections and then not only win the sale, but also start to refine, my sales copy and everything else to overcome all of those objections. So the other thing that I should say about direct sales is probably the better person to learn from on this would be, like Stelly gave a whole talk on sales earlier, because he's a salesperson. And I'm not a salesperson at all. Like, I'm the person who goes to a conference and doesn't meet anyone because it's like I'm too introverted to want to go up and say hi. So this is like sales for someone who doesn't want to actually do sales but still wants to grow their company. So I had a really simple process, and that was just to make a list of prospects, send them cold emails, and get on a call. And so I would make prospect lists in two different ways. So one, I would go down to a really specific niche where I would say, like email marketing for professional bloggers. Like, people would say, oh, that's a really, really narrow niche. Like, at one point we tried to raise funding and all of the venture capitalists were like, no, that market's too tiny. That's like, we're not going to invest. But we would actually get a lot more specific than that. So we would get down to like email marketing for professional paleo recipe bloggers who are women. Because at that point, you can start to make a list of, maybe there's 40 of them. You can get really, really specific and actually list them out. Or we'd do another thing and be like, okay, let's create a landing page for email marketing for men's fashion bloggers. And there's not very many of them. And so I remember talking to a fitness blogger, and she was saying, like, wow, everyone on the entire internet, it feels like, is switching to ConvertKit. And at the time we had like $5,000 of MRR, and so I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not true. But she had this feeling, because what had happened is we had carved out this tiny little niche of about 30 people and gone after them, and we'd gotten 2 or 3 to switch, and then we've been able to use their names to get a few more. And so what happened is we created this echo chamber in this tiny little environment, and they all knew each other. So it was like, oh, you're thinking of switching from MailChimp to ConvertKit? Oh, well, I'm thinking of doing the same thing. And we could do that over and over again in all these tiny little industries and get a bunch of traction. So we would list prospects that way of, what tiny little industry are you in? But then we would also do it based on what tool you were using. So I'd use things like Built With or Nerdy Data to scrape the web and see, like, okay, everyone who's using MailChimp, like, let's get that list and then go after it. Or people who are using Infusionsoft and Lead Pages together or something like that. We create our lists that way. The email that I used was really straightforward. I just say, hey, is anything frustrating you with MailChimp? The reason I ask is I run ConvertKit. And then I would try to name drop a few of the most relevant names to their industry. So in some cases, I wouldn't be name dropping someone big, but I would be name dropping someone who they knew, who might have a blog audience of 10,000 people, but it would be like another fitness blogger or another men's fashion blogger. From here, I'd try to get on a call and then go from there. Now, the biggest thing that happened after this was through these calls, I would have these great conversations, and then people would say, you know what? I love what you're doing. I love what ConvertKit's about. It's targeted at bloggers. I'm a blogger. That makes a lot of sense. But it's too much work to switch. I'm not going to switch email marketing tools. It's just too much work. And no matter how much convincing I try to do of like, oh no, it's not that much work. Like you can just like export those people and then, swap out every single one of your forms and then copy over every single one of your automation emails. Like it's not that much work. Just do it. For whatever reason, that wasn't compelling. And so finally on a whim, I was like, tell you what, it's not that much work. I'll do it for you for free. And what was interesting there is that they had kind of hung all of their objections to the sale on that last thing. Like there's a bunch of reasons that they could use as a reason to not buy, but they hung it all on like it's too much work to switch. And so then when I could take that away and say, great, I'll do it all for you for free, then we would often win the sale because of that. So now we call this Concierge Migrations, and we've done many hundreds of them now. But it ends up being an amazing way to get people in the door. And we find that even though our average deal size is like $200 a month, it's relatively straightforward, so we still end up making quite a bit from it. And my initial sales process was just using a Trello board. So probably one of the biggest things that I would fail to do is follow up. And so I just used this Trello board of like who I contacted, whether they were not likely to buy or interested, and then move them across. And on the follow-up, the first time that I actually learned to really do this, or that I was really bad at it, is when I had a conversation at a conference like this. It was actually in Prague a few years ago. And I was talking with my friend Ryan, and someone else came up and joined the conversation and said like, hey, I've been thinking about using ConvertKit, all of that. And after, I talked to him for a few minutes, and then he wandered off. And I pulled out my phone, opened the Trello app, and added his name in there in the, I guess, interested column is probably where I put him. And then when I look up from doing that with my phone, our friend Ryan is like, about time. Like I've been trying to get you to keep track of these conversations for years. And coming to the world from, or coming to this from a sales background, I was just like, yeah, the guy said he wanted to sign up, he'll probably sign up. And so I would totally miss it on the follow-up. And once I actually learned to do that, then it made a big difference. So this is kind of where things went once we started doing the direct sales. So made the decision when we were all the way down at 1,300 MRR, and then over the next little over 6 months, gradually got up to about 14,000 MRR. And then the tactics changed a little bit. So the first thing is that we ran out of money, because that $50,000 when hiring a team doesn't last super long. But we had gotten to the point where we could just barely scrape by. So a few people on the team deferred salaries for a month, and then we needed about $15,000 a month in order to cover basic expenses, and so ended up like narrowly scraping through that. But I think the cash balances got down to like $3,000. The next thing was that we changed the messaging. And so a lot of people were like, okay, email marketing for professional bloggers, I get that, that's interesting, but like where do you fit in the landscape? So email marketing is a pretty crowded space. Like we could probably sit here and name 25 email marketing companies that make over $10, $20 million a year. Like there's a lot of them. And so a customer said this and kind of gave us this bracketing ability. And they said, oh, ConvertKit, it's the power of Infusionsoft. but easier to use than MailChimp. And I was like, can I quote you on that? And we've used it every time since then. And so for people in our industry, they know both of these tools, and both of them have a reputation. And so this one phrase really got us really a lot of results. And this is the exact same thing that people are doing when they're saying like, oh, it's Uber for whatever, or Airbnb for this. But this let us do it by bracketing between two other products. So at this point, we still kept doing direct sales a lot, but then we started to get some other channels. Now, you notice word of mouth on here, and I think word of mouth is probably one of the most frustrating channels ever. And I had a conversation with a founder who I knew in a year had gone from 2,000 MRR to 50,000 MRR in a calendar year, and I thought, that's amazing. How'd you do it? And he's like, oh, word of mouth. I was like, that is the most frustrating thing anyone has ever told me. Because I was like, oh yeah, word of mouth. Like, oh yeah, just pull the word of mouth lever. Like, then the sales will come. And because like, what do you do with that? It's, and everyone's like, oh, we'll build a great product and then word of mouth will come. And it's just like, no, that's not a compelling thing. You can't just, when you're at $2,000 a month of revenue, like word of mouth is not going to drive it. But if you use those direct sales, then that can start to kickstart the word of mouth and more, start to get those referrals. So once we were at about 15,000 a month, then we started to see some of those more natural referrals coming in. And then we doubled down on that a bit by adding an affiliate program. Has anyone tried an affiliate program for their business? A few people have. So we're in the blogging world where affiliate programs are really common. And so, in B2B SaaS, that might not be nearly as common, but I'll still share some of the things that worked for us. So for those of you who have tried an affiliate program, I bet a lot of you have had pretty mediocre results. And that's because you don't know about the 98-2 rule. Everyone knows the 80-20 rule, right? So 80% of your results come from 20%. So you'd think like the 98-2 rule is like, oh, 98% of your results come from 2% of your affiliates. But that's not true. It's really that only 2% of your affiliates will ever sell anything. And so people are like, oh, I'm going to turn on an affiliate program and that will bring in all these sales. But it really won't, because most people just will not sell anything. And I've seen this across the board in a ton of different affiliate programs, and it's certainly true for ours. So the way that you have to improve this is to actually apply direct sales to your affiliate program. So instead of just opening up and be like, yeah, go to convertkit.com/partner, and like you can sign up and there's all the resources. No one really does that in a meaningful way. But if you hunt down the partners and say, hey, we have an affiliate program, we'd like to work with you on this, here's a promotion that we could put together, and you have that really proactive approach through direct sales, then you can start to get results. So a couple of the things that are key on the affiliate program, if you have one, 30% I think is a minimum commission that you should have. I see a lot of SaaS businesses playing around with like 10%, and that's just not really meaningful to get someone to promote. Especially, I've talked to a few people who run like social media products, and so you could get a lot of results from bloggers promoting you and that kind of thing. And all of these bloggers want recurring revenue, but if you're offering them 10% recurring, that's not going to cut it. And so I think of it as like the money that I would spend on ads, and actually I would spend more money on ads than 30% recurring. Like I'll happily give that to an affiliate. And then the next thing that worked really well is to say to people, hey, we'll give you a month free if you write a review. And so what would happen there is we ended up getting a whole bunch of people, writing reviews of, oh, this is why I switched from Aweber to ConvertKit, or this is more detail. And of course, they get to put their affiliate link in that review, but we also said, hey, we'll give you a month free. And so since our pricing is based on how many subscribers you have, the tiny blogs who had 500 subscribers would write a post, and that's great. We want that. And we'd give them a month free of a $29 a month plan. But then someone else who had 50,000 subscribers, 80,000 subscribers, they would get a month free on a $500 a month plan. And so to them, it was still meaningful. And we're like, yeah, that's great. You're going to be sending this out to an audience. It's going to go out on a much more popular blog, and it'll be sent out to an audience of like 50,000 people. So that worked really well. And so really it's that direct sales plus the affiliates and being able to scale that. The next thing that we did a lot is actually traveled. So I had this conversation with a well-known blogger, and he was saying, hey, the next time you're in New York, like, it would be great to meet up. And I was like, cool, yeah, the next time I'm in New York, like, I'll do that. And a friend was like, so when are you going to go? And I was like, well, when there's like if I get invited to speak at a conference in New York or, something else happens. He's like, no, that's a reason. Like, you want to meet with this guy, so just get on a plane and go meet with him. And so he taught me, like, probably the most useful direct sales tactic that I've ever learned. And basically what you do is you say, and you go like, I don't know, hey, Gary, I'm going to be, Gary, where do you live?
Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam. So you say, hey, Gary, I've got some meetings in Amsterdam, still trying to narrow down the dates. So I'm either going to be there on, the 22nd to the 23rd or, the 30th and 31st. If either works for you, I'd love to get together. And Gary's the only person that I'm trying to meet with in Amsterdam. But when I send that, he'll either say, no, I'm busy. And it's not, no, I'm busy on those dates. Like, because if someone says that, then you know that they're blowing you off. Because you gave them two different dates. And so, like, the chances of them being totally busy on those two totally separate dates is pretty slim. But, if they say, yeah, that'll work, and this blogger was like, yeah, he picked one date, I bought the flight, and then I was able to say, okay, who else do I want to meet with in New York, and line up, a dozen other meetings around that time. And so I've done this a bunch of just visiting a city, meeting people there, and the friend who taught me this technique, his name's Ryan Delk, and he was head of growth at a company called Gumroad, and he used this to get Taylor Swift and Bon Jovi and Justin Bieber and Eminem and a bunch of other music artists to all sell through Gumroad, purely because he was like, yeah, hey, I'm gonna be in LA, like, and then he'd use that to get a meeting with, some VP at Atlantic Records or, all these different places. And so really just showing up in person makes a big difference. And so early on, at this time we were about 15,000 MRR. I made a trip, I live in Boise, Idaho, went out to New York, hopped down to Nashville, and then over to San Diego, and ended up winning, if you don't know the blogging world, these people won't be familiar, but ended up winning some accounts from people like Pat Flynn. Pat's now sent us like 10% of our total business just because he has such a popular podcast. And then these other people, this guy Jeff is super popular in the book author space. Joel has a very popular fitness community. And so all of these people have sent us at least 10 to 20,000 MRR a piece, and they're all from relationships that I made from those initial conversations. So if you fast forward, so the last slide I showed you ended in July or August. If you fast forward to December, we'd gone from 15,000 a month of MRR to 98,000 a month. I was just pissed that we ended the year at 98,000 and not 100,000. I was like, come on, let's try to get that extra $1,220. Who's counting? So from here, we started to find a couple problems with our technique. The first was that customers can sign up at any time, and so they don't really. They'll put it off. And the next one was that affiliates were slow to promote the product. They didn't see a reason to promote now versus at another time. And so the tactic that we implemented to work on this was we started putting in webinars. And so this did two things. So first, it created an event. So for an affiliate, like a blogger or an integration partner or something like that, they'd be like, hey, I'd love to promote ConvertKit. I'll drop a link on a resources page. That's not really going to work for us. So instead we'd say, hey, let's do this webinar together and we'll co-host it and we'll go from there. And so with that, it created an actual event for them to promote and drive traffic to and attention to. And then we were able to offer bonuses at the end. And so customers were able to, had a reason to sign up today because it was like, oh, sign up in order to get this free course with it or these other things versus like, oh, ConvertKit's cool, I'll sign up next month, which is code for never. So the first month that we decided to, or when we started doing webinars and playing around with it, we did 21 webinars in a month to really test it out. And then some of our other stats, this was from the first 2 months, some of the results that we got. So when we focused on webinars, I guess the first month we did 13 webinars. The next month we did 21. Our average webinar size was only 75 live attendees. But we thought, like, we're doing a lot of one-on-one sales, and so any quantity of attendees greater than one, we just treat it as, like, I'd happily do a demo to 4 people, and so we weren't ever upset if not very many people showed up. And then our largest webinar ever was with that blogger Pat Flynn, and got us 750 trials from that. And then from all these webinars, we picked up about 19,000 email subscribers because everyone who signed up for the webinar came in through, ended up joining our email list. And then probably the last thing that's made a really big difference in our business is actually having expansion revenue. You guys are all SaaS veterans, so I'm pretty sure you know what this means, but I'll show you some examples. So the first, this is basically if customers on their own, as they're more successful, can move up how much they pay you. So for example, in Barometrics, which we use for all of our analytics, the more customers you have, the more you pay for it. In Help Scout, like I just noticed that our Help Scout bill is like $1,700 a month because we keep adding all these people, and it just keeps growing. And then in ConvertKit, if you have 1,000 subscribers, you pay us $29 a month, and if you have 10,000, then you're paying us around $100 a month, and it scales all the way up to our big customers have 1.5 million subscribers, and they pay $4,000 a month or so. So that helps a lot. This is a screenshot of Barometrics. And this just shows the breakdown of, in this May of 2016, we had 25,000 in churn, but 14,000 of that was counteracted by the expansion revenue. So being in like a, I guess, relatively high churn business, because we're selling to bloggers, that expansion revenue is super helpful because it counteracts so much of it. And then so 2 years after that decision point to double down, we'd scaled to 411,000 of MRR. And that was mostly through the direct sales. Today we're at 792,000, growing at about 5% a month, 9.5 million a year. And you can see that the churn is still a decent problem for us, and there's some other things. If you guys ever want to dive through any of these metrics, just go to convertkit.barometrics.com. Our entire dashboard is totally public. And you can look back through everything. I just see that as something that could be helpful for everyone else to learn. Okay, I want to take maybe 2 questions and then end with one last point. Does anyone have a question? I forgot to. Oh, okay. We have a couple here already, so we'll start with these, and then everyone else can maybe grab me afterwards for a question if you have one. So vision for the next 5 years. So we're entirely bootstrapped. I didn't really talk about that. So the vision is keep growing, push for 100 million ARR with the smallest team possible, and then never sell. So that's kind of where I'm headed. Okay, commission for affiliates. So versus commission structure for our sales team. I think there's a lot better people to answer this question. I don't think we have a very good commission structure for our sales team right now, and you should probably read blog posts by people who are far smarter than me on that. And then the last question is, how big is your sales team in relation to your whole company? Are they all in-house, or do they work remotely? So now we've got a team of 30 people, and we have 4 people on our sales team, so those 4 people all do sales in some form, but one of them mostly teaches webinars, and she does a little bit of sales. And then another person is our affiliate manager and kind of relationships manager. And so she's out on the road quite a bit more. Like she's doing an East Coast tour this week, meeting with a bunch of our partners and affiliates, kind of doing that get on the plane, show up in person thing. And then we have someone who has a bit more of a traditional like SDR role. So doing sales development and that outreach, and then some of the management behind the scenes. And then we have another just true outbound salesperson. So we have 4 people on that sales team out of 30 total. And then the rest of the breakdown of the company is about 10 engineers and product people, 5 people in marketing, and the rest are either in operations or customer success. Okay, so the last thing that I want to leave you guys with is all of this, like these things that don't scale. So the direct sales, and getting on these calls and doing this concierge onboarding and switching every single customer over. You have to do those because that's what enables those channels that do scale. So if someone's telling you like, oh, just pull the word of mouth lever, the way that you do it is by going out and getting these customers one at a time. And then when it's time to switch them over, I was FTPing into their site to swap out their MailChimp form for a ConvertKit form, and doing all this to get a $29 a month customer. And then we're able to build that momentum and do those things that don't scale, that everyone said was really a pain. And that would get the word of mouth going. And then we were able to apply those sales principles to webinars, and now you're able to doing that at more scale. And so through all these things that don't scale, we ended up getting to, nearly 10 million ARR because that's what enables those channels that do scale. So thanks for having me. I'll be over here if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you guys.